We all know cost of living has skyrocketed in California in the last 4 years. At the same time, incomes have gone up moderately. We were also wondering what the California legislature is thinking about this. So we sat down with Senator Aisha Wahab, who is passionate about cost of living.
You could do everything right and still not own a home. I have a doctorate. My sister has a master's degree, and yet we are not homeowners. We work full time. We work very hard. We are frugal where we need to be, and yet we are not able to even compete in purchasing a home.
Today, we discuss with her what's going on in California with cost of living and what is the legislature doing about it. We also get to know her as a public servant.
20 years ago, renters didn't have to pay a monthly fee to have a pet. Now they pay a monthly fee to have a pet. They pay a monthly fee to park their car in a carport, not even a garage, but just a space.
I'm Siama Koremi. Welcome to California Insider. Aisha, it's great to have you on. Welcome.
Thank you.
We want to talk to you about cost of living. You're a senator in California. The situation is getting worse in terms of cost of living. Can you tell us what's happening?
I think that there's a lot of different factors when it comes to the economy. And obviously, the economy works in cycles as well. I grew up during the Great Recession, right? And my family, for example, we lost our home as a foreclosure, right? One of millions of Americans who have seen that. I think we're seeing it again. We've had the different international affairs that have been taking place in the last couple of years that are obviously detrimental to globalization and business and much more. But then we also have seen COVID, and that had a lasting impact on our supply chain and much more. But then we also have a greater demand in regards to better wages. And primarily for me, I always think it's the cost of housing that has grown so much that people cannot afford to live. And when we're talking about quality of life and cost of living, it's can you sustain your household? And so when we talk about that, it's can you afford your rent? Can you afford your mortgage? Can you afford all the bills that are attached to it? We're seeing an insurance crisis with the wildfire situation, and more insurance companies are choosing to leave California or increase their cost. We are seeing utilities go up, and we are seeing a continuous rate hike. And we are seeing folks that have wages that are remaining the same over years. So I think that there are a lot of concerns that I have. I actually ran for office to be able to tackle a lot of these issues.
Do you hear from the people with these issues? Do they come to you?
Oh, absolutely. Every time there's a rate hike from the utilities companies, we get emails and calls. Our district office is flooded with a lot of insurance questions. For example, I had a constituent that called that said that an insurance company flew a drone over their house and they saw algae on the roof and they canceled the insurance rather than asking them to cure it, right? Cure the problem, which basically means take care of the algae, be given a month, 2 months to fix the problem. Insurance just wants to find an excuse to leave, right? And stop insuring certain people in certain areas.
And how is this impacting them?
Very negatively. So when people are worried about the cost of living, and in my district in particular, if you take a look at a lot of the tech companies, they have done massive layoffs. And it's been for the last couple of years, right? And it's not reported as much in the news, which is problematic for me because people don't think it's a real issue. And we are seeing more and more people being laid off. We also see the change of our administration that will impact a lot of people's perception on the market, as well as just in general when we're talking about the economy. Change is always uncomfortable for people, and they don't know what to expect and they don't know what to believe. As well as, the workforce, when people are on different visas and people have different statuses, that also makes people uncomfortable when there's a change in administration and much more.
You mentioned the tech worker layoffs. What is happening in your area?
So my area, I represent the East Bay and the South Bay, which is, basically the heart of Silicon Valley. And many people are saying that, if they work for a tech company, a lot of tech companies are downsizing and they tend to be the most nimble. Tech companies are very, paying attention to every single dollar and how much they're spending and which technologies are out there. And so if you take a look even of the products, products of a lot of companies. They haven't really shifted in updates and, new technology, and their sales are all a little bit more slower. And you're seeing even tech companies that have subscription type of platforms that they're increasing the cost of their subscription, but for what purpose, right? It's because, they have a budget that they are not able to fulfill, and they're slowly, getting rid of overhead, which is largely employees and salaries. And those employees are also struggling. Okay, so if they bought a home, what are they going to do? Are they going to downsize? So it is a domino effect, and the economy is a big, big concern for so many of us.
Do you think there's going to be a long-term impact if the cost of living in California stay what it is compared to the incomes?
Yes, absolutely. I think more and more people are struggling. In fact, we have a very high percentage of poverty in California, which people don't talk about. And many people will talk about the working poor. It's not just about the working poor. It's also, when we're talking about poverty, we're talking about disabled individuals. We're talking about seniors on fixed income. We're talking about people who are struggling. My generation is struggling to support their families and their parents that are aging, as well as potentially start their family, purchase a home, or whatever the case may be. And they're making decisions that are incredibly crucial in their life and their family, which is either not starting a family, not purchasing a home, not being able to take care of their elders, and potentially even moving out of the state or out of the area. And so, we genuinely have a very difficult time as a society as to, okay, what is causing this? What are the pressures? And like I said, some of them are things we can control, and some of them are things we cannot control, and some of them are very cyclical.
Can you explain these factors?
There's a number of issues. When we're talking about housing, we're talking about supply and demand, but it's not just supply and demand. We are behind our production in housing, first and foremost. But then when we are producing housing, who are we producing housing for? In my district, a home on average can cost $1.4 million. Can a teacher afford that? No, right?
Especially with this mortgage rate now.
Yes, especially with the high interest rates.
Because it will be $10,000 a month of mortgage for
potentially, depending on down payment,
taxes,
of course, right?
Mortgage, yeah.
Property taxes, also a lot of the utilities and much more. And even, I like to focus on people who are even more vulnerable than people who can purchase a home. Renters. I'm a renter. And I will say that renters, for example, are dealing with multiple different junk fees, right? And I call them junk fees because they are. 20 years ago, renters didn't have to pay a monthly fee to have a pet. Now they pay a monthly fee to have a pet. They pay a monthly fee to park their car in a carport, not even a garage, but just a space. And how much are they paying? Here in Sacramento, in some of the complexes, is about $175 to $250. In the Bay Area, depending on which city.
For your car or your
just
pet?
a monthly, just to be able to park your car where you live.
So that's just to exclude it from the rent cost, $250.
Yes, it could be $175. It depends on which complex. It could be $100. In the Bay Area, they may give you a parking spot, and then you pay $50 a month. You could pay $100 a month. This fee didn't exist 20 years ago. And then we also have a pet fee, not only a security deposit. Let's say if your dog or cat or pet, destroyed property, you used to put a pet security deposit of $500, $1,000, maybe even $1,500. Now, not only do you do the security deposit of the pet, but you also pay monthly to have a pet.
Wow.
Right? And so renters, I think, are actually suffering more than homeowners in many ways, right? Because they are not building equity. They are literally throwing money away. And so when we're talking about who is a renter, renters are, young people. They are seniors. They are people who potentially want to start a family but aren't there yet. They are people who are trying to earn money and save money for a down payment, but they are never going to be able to get the $170,000 down payment that they need to buy these homes. And so it's almost a system that's built not for poor people. It is a system that is based on a lot of, again, fees and bureaucratic systems that don't work for the people. And I think more and more people are frustrated. And so even the utility hikes, as state lawmakers, we have no authority over utility companies, right? We can push laws and try to do our best around that, but the rate hikes are done by a commission that doesn't even really report to the people, right? And for example, we've heard in the news that there may be a fifth rate hike in 1 year for utility companies. And so what are we doing when we're talking about, profit versus greed, right? Obviously, this is the United States. We believe that everyone should be able to make a dollar. However, we also have to see, who is struggling, who is suffering. And as policymakers, we're supposed to protect the most vulnerable community, right? We are supposed to protect seniors. And I will say we are supposed to protect children. We're supposed to protect women and working people. And I will say this. Our senior population is one of our fastest demographics in the growing homeless population. Our seniors are one of the fastest growing demographics that are going back into the workforce. So when you go to Denny's and when you go to Safeway and you're buying your groceries, who's working the counter?
You see older people.
Older people. It's not teenagers anymore. These are part-time jobs or low-paying jobs, right? And I say this all the time to my colleagues to say that, we need to do more. And so, for example, I have a number of bills that I introduced this past year, many of them signed by the governor, that, make sure that, for example, nursing homes can't reject you if you're on Medi-Cal, which is quite a significant amount of seniors on Medi-Cal, right? That did not have a retirement plan or save up enough and so forth. And because insurance companies' reimbursement rates don't reimburse at higher levels for Medi-Cal patients versus, private insurance companies, right? And I highlight this because we continue to see the problem where if you are poor, the system doesn't work for you, right? And I think that it's my job to be able to introduce policies that help more and more people across the board.
So you mentioned the housing, and you said there is the supply and demand. There's not enough supply, but what you're building is $1.5 million homes. Why is that?
I served on local city council, and many people will be upset that I'm saying this, especially those that serve, and specifically city managers. The city managers who work a lot with the developer, they will play a game of hot potato of who's responsible for developing housing and specifically adding the costs. So cities are inherently interested in market rate and above market rate housing, because it basically means that you will have a more affluent community purchasing the home. You will benefit from the property tax and the sales tax of the home. And so the more it is, the more money that city gets, right? And then you will have another component of it in the sense that, yes, cities are responsible for trying to increase low market costs housing, affordable housing, below market rate and so forth. And oftentimes you'll have a lot of community members that are opposed to it, all right? Because, they think that low income housing, affordable housing, will attract people that they don't want in our backyard. It is also a strong belief that more development means, tighter spaces, higher population. And, if we are seeing developments, the standard development right now is usually condos and townhomes. And so they're closer together. They're usually 3 stories. You see
density.
Yeah, more density, which is great, but it's also problematic for people who have single family homes because they say, okay, it's too many people, not enough parking, it blocks my view. It really depends on what part of California you live. You hear different arguments. But not a single person is asking, okay, how can a person with a disability afford to have a unit, to be able to rent, let alone buy, right? The American dream was always about buying and owning a home. And now we are seeing that dream has vanished for millions of Americans, right? Especially in California. And we are seeing also the fact that people who are renting cannot afford to rent anymore. Again, with a lot of these fees that should not exist. It is not fair for poor people, period.
Now, in terms of the utilities, You mentioned the commission. Who controls the commission? How does it work?
There is a process, and I will let the public.
Go and find out.
Yes.
So essentially, these commissions set rates, right?
Yes.
And there is a gap from what we're gathering. There seems to be an economical gap. If you're in the bucket of the well-to-do, you may not be wealthy, but you have enough income to, so the $100, $200, $300 a month doesn't impact you significantly. Yes. And from what we've gathered, some of the people that serve in these commissions and boards, they're in that category. They are not seeing the day-to-day challenges that the lower income.
Yeah, I think it's more than just, they are not seeing the challenges of like vulnerable community members and more members of the community that are struggling. But, oftentimes the public is allowed to make comments, right, on what is happening. And, the government is supposed to be transparent and accessible to people. Most people don't realize who approves the rate hikes. Most people don't realize that they are able to oppose a rate hike and say that we don't want this. And even if they do, where does it go? And the fact that these commissions have a lack of oversight and accountability to the public is problematic. And that is something that I know that the state legislature is very frustrated with. And there are attempts to tackle that issue. I know that my office has talked about it, and it's also very complicated because there's a lot of regulation around utility companies. For example, the infrastructure that we have when we're talking about cables in the ground and cables in the air and we see it, it's a lot of cost to make sure that we have a 21st century system, right? Which we're not there yet. The mere fact that, we talk about undergrounding cables, right? To dig into the earth, cement and everywhere, to put in the best quality cable for a higher speed internet and, 100% secure model of technology and so forth, it costs money. So you have a cost there, you have a cost to remove the old system, you have a cost in a lot of different areas. But so there's a lot of technical factors there. There's also a lot of technical factors in regards to safety. There's a lot of technical factors of like in rural California versus the Bay Area. There's also a lot of details regarding how profit is made for these companies. And so it's not just a one issue area when we're talking about utilities, it's multiple different areas. And they all touch each other. And so even the same argument will go with insurance companies. The system is so convoluted and so difficult that if I were to introduce one bill, it may have negative effects that I didn't plan for. And so I think that it requires a lot of technical experience and expertise to tackle the issue first and foremost. But then it's also, okay, what are we doing to our district? What are we doing to areas in rural California? So for me, I feel that infrastructure and education should not be a political issue. We should have the most state-of-the-art education and infrastructure in the world. We are the 5th largest economy in the world, right? And yet we are struggling to keep up with our basic infrastructure. And that's not just the utilities standpoint. That's also our freeways or transportation or, you name it across the board. If we are to compete on an international front, with globalization, we do have a lot more business, a lot more commerce, a lot more tourism, a lot more travel, and much more. And yet when you travel to other countries, when you're looking at their state of transportation versus ours, we are far behind. And California is debating constantly about high-speed rail and the bullet train and much more. And I've heard this argument since I was in elementary school. And we're not there yet. Why? Right? And there's a lot of industry that argue amongst each other as to who gets a piece of the pie. And I'll be honest with you, as a policymaker, it's very frustrating for me because these industries are very powerful. They, have a lot of influence, both inside the legislature as well as outside. And a lot of good work tends to be stalled because of these debates.
If you like California Insider and you like to know what's going on in California, make sure to check out Epoch Times. This is a newspaper that started by a group of Chinese Americans because of human rights abuses in China. and now it's starting to grow here. Make sure to go to the Epoch Times website and check out the California section, where you can get a lot of fresh perspectives on what's going on in California. Now let's go back to the interview. We've been talking to different members of the legislative body, and everybody's concerned about cost of living. And if you guys work together, what can you guys do about it?
I think that we're going to take a look this year. I can't speak to exactly what's being planned. There's a lot of discussion. We just swore in a handful of members, roughly about a dozen members just got sworn in yesterday. And these are all brand new members to the Senate. One of the goals and concerns that we have is, okay, so how are we going to work together starting in the new year to tackle the issues that most residents have? I know my office, for example, has been really focused on a lot of issues regarding vulnerable communities, being able to balance the scale of power, and ensuring that vulnerable communities have some support. Several of our bills, for example, when we introduce, they die through the process for whatever reason, and sometimes they're vetoed even if they make it across the finish line. And with my new colleagues, it's also, for example, when we create policies in California, it's not just for a district. Yes, we represent our district and the values of our district, but a policy regarding infrastructure affects the entire state. And so you have to account for what does that look like in rural California. I don't represent rural California, so I have to lean on my colleagues to understand what are their concerns regarding watering. And rural California has a different economy than the Bay Area. For example, in the city of Fremont, that's in my district, we have 900 manufacturers, the most in one city than the rest of the state at all. Like any other city does not compete with the city of Fremont regarding manufacturing. But would I understand agriculture and that economy? No, not in my district. But my colleague in a rural part of California would understand it better. And so when we have laws regarding water usage, irrigation as a whole, infrastructure regarding clean technology and much more, it may be something that my district wants in some capacity, and it may not work in rural California for a wide variety of reasons. Their spacing, how they utilize technology, things like that, versus, my district that is very supportive of new technologies and very quick to adopt new technologies. And the cost may be different as well. The cities may be able to afford it, but when you're taking a look at rural California and some of the cities there, they may not be able to afford massive change and infrastructure upgrades. So that is a big, big problem that we have. And we work with our federal government partners to be able to prioritize funding. We try to ensure that we can streamline permitting processes and much more. So there's a lot that goes into it that is not necessarily legislation, but it's a funding issue. It's a permitting issue. It's a bureaucratic issue sometimes. And sometimes we can really adjust a lot of this and introduce new laws to make streamlining a priority, and that's what I think a lot of senators have done. But we have a long way to go in regards to infrastructure and investment in California.
You mentioned the challenges with bureaucracy and some special interests. Some people may argue that the state policies sometimes drive the cost of a lot of things.
It can be true and it could be not true. It depends on the situation, right? I think that there are efforts, for example, state policy that wants to streamline efforts. Right, we're seeing a lot of that, and we're trying to make, for example, development of housing faster and cheaper. And when we're trying to make it faster, it becomes cheaper because there's less time, less hours you have to pay people. You can put it up for sale quicker, things like that. So there is efforts there, and it has been very successful. And then there are things that we have to prioritize for people's safety. Right? When we're talking about infrastructure, digging in the ground, we don't want to affect groundwater. We don't want to affect the environment as much. We don't want to affect people's health. And that creates policies that, make things a little bit harder and maybe a little bit more review. It's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Because there has to be some oversight and some accountability effort. But at the same time, it could also have the negative impact that it may cost more. So I think it can be both ways.
And in terms of going back and analyzing some of these policies, from what we're gathering, there's a lot of laws made in California
Yes.
every year, and sometimes they conflict each other and sometimes they create. Is there much thought about that?
Yes. For example, there's a lot of individuals, myself included, that have requested audits, right, to see how is the money being spent, what is the success rate of different projects and programs. And for example, I chair a subcommittee that I have asked the administration, the different departments multiple times that I would like to see more consolidation of different efforts. For example, this past year, I worked very hard to see a consolidation of a lot of the transit agencies in the Bay Area. We have 9 Bay Area counties, 27 official transit agencies.
Wow.
There's no need for 27 agencies. And there was a lot of pushback against that. When we know our transit is not faster than necessarily taking your car, it's not cheaper, safer, or better for the end user necessarily. And so when I bring this up, again, there's a lot of different interest groups that would oppose it for whatever reason, right? And we all know that interest groups are considering the fiscal impact to their organization, not necessarily for the outcome of the resident, which is what I care about. So I take on a lot of big issues that people would typically avoid. But I take it on because I believe in a better California, more, stronger transit system that works, that competes with the international community in their transit systems, right? Again, 27 agencies. Now think about it. This is where, consolidation makes sense. That equates to 27 different boards that make decisions, 27 different administrative processes, right, for each different agency, 27 call centers, 27 hiring centers, 27 different, thought processes of what they manage. And some are duplicative of each other. Even in my own county, you will see transit agencies that are duplicative of each other. There is no need for that.
In one county?
Yes.
Doing the same thing, similar things?
Yes. And so I will say that's a problem. I'm very honest about it. And there are people that don't want to admit it and say that that's not the problem. The problem is this. They need more money. And I am opposed to increasing taxes for my residents when they are struggling with the cost of living to fund a broken system.
Do you have any thoughts for Californians that are struggling with cost of living, and is there any solutions from you guys?
I think that you have your representative that everybody should reach out and speak to. I think that the more that your representative hears your concerns and problems, they understand what is going on. The more that they understand, for example, we as policymakers, I have my own apartment that I'm supposed to be renting. I have my own utility fees that I have to pay for and much more. So I understand it from my own personal experience of what I'm dealing with. And when a constituent reaches out, a resident reaches out and says, hey, I just got this notice in the mail, I don't understand it, or I need help, what's going on? And we see that these are rate hikes that we've never seen before from an organization that is supposed to notify somebody. When we see, for example, HOAs that give these heavy assessments on people who own property, and these assessments are $40,000, and we've had these, right? When we see things that are very questionable, we get involved. We get involved. We try to understand the constituents' problem. We try to not only solve their problem right then and there, like their actual problem, but we also try to make sure that, okay, if that's the case, if this is happening to you, how many more people is this happening to that did not talk to me? And we can inquire and we can ask, whether it's a utility company, whether it's a homeowners association, whether it's an insurance company, what are you guys doing? We just had a resident that told us this. And if we're seeing that this is a trend or a growing problem, we introduce legislation that actually covers that problem. I have done that multiple times in my 2 years. And I will say that policy is always slower at the state level than it is at the local level. We do our best as much as possible, right? But Policy making is a slow process. It is something that frustrates me as a slightly impatient human being. Being from the Bay Area, we usually want our issues answered very quickly, right? We Google something, we are quick to take a look at, solving our own issues. But policy making has been designed to be a little bit slower, to take a look at the cost, to take a look at the impact. But I think all residents should be reaching out to their local electeds first and foremost, because oftentimes they can get a quicker response there. And then obviously their state lawmakers to share what's going on, at least educate us on what's happening in your life, and seeing if there is potentially a solution. So every single letter that comes to my office, we read. Right? I have staff that make sure that they read it, understand it. If it's a legitimate problem that we can solve, we're happy to solve it and work with that particular person. And then if it's something that we think that a law needs to be created, we will try to push that as well. I think it's really important to just represent your community. I think that, the state Senate has reached 51% female representation. And I believe that the state assembly is at 49%. And if you take a look at all the new members and even the makeup of the legislature as a whole, it's incredibly diverse, right? We have the first of so many different community groups, and it's still continuing to grow. And California is one of the most, if not, it is the most diverse state in the nation.
Probably in the world too.
In the world, most likely. We lead the country in so many different ways. And it's really about the diversity that we have, because we all come from different experiences, but our goal is common. We want to push California forward. We want to make sure that California is successful, and we want to make sure that all Californians feel this.
You have a very interesting background in public service. Can you tell us how you got involved with public service?
So I was very fortunate to be born in New York City, and I ended up in the foster care system. And I grew up in foster care. And, when you grow up in foster care, you grew up in a lot of different households and families and people around you. And you're exposed to a lot in a very young age. And you may not necessarily understand what is going on, but it's different. And I'm very proud of that, because it allowed me to learn about people in a faster way. And oftentimes people look at me and make a judgment and assume things. And that is the most human aspect of society, is that we make judgments and split-second decisions based on appearance. And oftentimes that's not the full depth of a human being. And we know that. And I'm very proud of being able to serve in this capacity. And I ran for local office primarily because of the housing crisis. I shared with you that my family home was foreclosed on. And when it was foreclosed, we had to start renting. And it's been over a decade that I've been renting, and I'm still renting, more than a decade. And I don't see a way where I can purchase a home still. And so when I ran for Hayward City Council, I ran because so many residents were complaining about the renters' issues. And they were coming to City Council week after week after week. And I was watching it, and I felt that none of the City Council members were doing anything to help these community members. And oftentimes, if you are not a homeowner or somebody that has real roots, as they say, in a city, you are not taken seriously. And that's wrong. And so I spoke to a lot of constituents. I spoke to a lot of neighbors and friends, and felt that the issues that I was privately struggling with, which is being a renter and trying to own a home and trying to get my life together and so forth, other people were struggling with. And it was just not being conveyed to the city council enough, and the city council didn't seem to really care. So when I ran, I became the only renter on city council. And if you really think about that, that's the reason why, if they don't know the problem, truly understand it, experienced it, lived it, they won't relate to the problem. When I became elected to the state Senate, I was the only renter in the state Senate. If you really think about that, that's a problem. 40 people that represent the 40 million Californians, and only one of them is a renter. When we know that there are millions of renters in California that are struggling. And so when I tell my colleagues that, hey, Did you know that I have to pay a parking fee every single month to rent and be able to like have my car in my, um, parking lot, if you will? Do you know that I would have to pay a pet fee to just have a pet dog? Do you know that I pay all the utilities? I pay the garbage and the sewage. It's a fabrication that landlords pay this. No, the cost is put on the renter, right? We pay those fees. And we're already paying so much for a studio or a 1 bedroom or a 2 bedroom. And why? Why are we struggling this much when we know that rent is supposed to be cheaper than owning a home most of the time, historically? And it's not. And so when you talk to a lot of people and you see how much people are struggling, and people are so proud in this country that they don't want to admit that they are struggling, right? They don't want handouts. And nobody's asking for a handout. That's why this issue is not prioritized. But as a policymaker, we are supposed to make sure that the laws also benefit the most vulnerable community. We are supposed to protect the most vulnerable community. We are supposed to balance power. We are supposed to ensure that greed and corruption do not exist. And that is a difficult challenge.
We are honored to be sponsored by Shenyun. Shenyun Performing Arts is reviving 5,000 years of lost Chinese traditional culture. It takes you back in time to the magical world of ancient China with a unique blend of brilliant dancing, beautiful costumes, and legends coming to life. The show choreography and production values are top-notch. However, it isn't just the technical ability of the dancers. It's the inner beauty and the devotion of the artist that will stir your soul to move you to tears. Make sure to go see it this year. Go to shenyun.com and book your tickets today.
It was spectacular, so beautiful.
I thought I was going to heaven.
Oh, it was electric.
I'm getting chills talking about it.
It gets a 10 from me, that's for sure.
It was that good.
Absolutely marvelous.
Hands down the best show I've ever seen.
And what was it like for you when you started in the city council? Was it difficult?
It was absolutely difficult, primarily because when I won, I was seen as an outsider. A lot of the local organizations were not necessarily supporting me. I ran as a challenger. So I challenged the sitting council members that were there. And oftentimes that does not happen. And oftentimes the challenger loses. And so there is a perception of what you're trying to achieve versus what you are working for. And you are not necessarily welcomed all the time in a local city council race and so forth. And sometimes you are. And you have to work with your colleagues that have completely different views than you, right? And I had a council of 7 total. And they would always say that they vote together. That's not the point of being a policymaker or representing the people. You represent the people. You can disagree with your colleagues and say, I understand what you're saying, but in my experience and me speaking to the residents that I represent, this is a significant concern. And so, for example, I pushed very deliberate policies that protect residents, specifically renters, within 6 months. We also worked very hard at the coalition that I built to ensure that we are investing in better technology in that city and infrastructure. I also worked with our public safety departments to make sure that we held public safety officials more accountable, but there was more training and resources to be able to provide service to residents. These were all things that we did in City Council in a very short period of time, within a year or two, including increasing the minimum wage for residents. And in Hayward, it was lower than most of our neighbors, and we were not able to retain employees. And so we made sure that we increased that. In the city of Hayward, when I first started, the median family income was $65,000 a year, compared to many of our neighbors whose median family income was $100,000 or more. That's a big difference, right? Especially in the Bay Area. So the district that I represent, Hayward, is still one of the least affluent cities compared to the rest of the district, right? And I highlight this because it's a lot of hard work. And when I was on city council, COVID also happened. So the pandemic started. People didn't understand how
It was your
to.
first time at the city council.
Yes. And while we were dealing with the pandemic, I will say that I was the first to say that we need to support our small businesses that were forced to shut down. We need to ensure that we are protecting residents, both property owners and renters, from losing their homes. And those were all things we took care of. And I will say that I'm very proud to say that we were the first in the nation to have a COVID testing site in our city. We were one of the first to also have vaccines for people, completely free. And we were a model that other cities and other counties were starting to copy. And it's through a lot of hard work that I've done with our public safety officials, our advocates, and understanding exactly how it's done. For example, I represent the largest Asian district in California. It's 55% Asian in my district. That Asian is very diverse. I'm Asian, but nobody thinks that, right? And at the end of the day, when you take a look at that, how to represent a diverse community, just to sign up for COVID testing as well as the vaccine eventually, you had to log on to an online site and sign up for the vaccine. There are people that don't have access to the internet, even in the Bay Area. There are people that were not able to communicate with the public health officials in their native tongue. And we set up days where we were only communicating to certain communities and allowing them to come to get a vaccine with a loved one that could translate for them, with chairs and wheelchairs available for the elders that were not on the internet, that did not watch English news, that did not understand exactly, what this is, but they are vulnerable community members because they could potentially be impacted and die from COVID. Right? So there is a lot of work in a very short period of time. And I'm very proud of the experience because it's allowed me to grow as an individual and as a policymaker and as a representative of this community.
Did something motivate you to work extra hard in that city council?
I'm very much focused on the goals that I have and being able to achieve them. And oftentimes when I see that people are struggling, myself included, my family included, my friends included, it bothers me. It bothers me that people work so hard and still can't achieve their dreams. And it's where, systems are designed that don't necessarily benefit poor people. You could do everything right and still not own a home. I have a doctorate. My sister has a master's degree, and yet we are not homeowners. We work full time. We work very hard. We are frugal where we need to be. And yet we are not able to even compete in purchasing a home.
Do you have a philosophy around service?
I believe it's incredibly important to do for others, first and foremost, and prioritize the most vulnerable community member that is not necessarily able to speak out in everything that they need and to share their own struggle, and probably are either ashamed or have stigma or shy or don't even know that they can say that I need help. And the reason for that is because when you grow up in foster care, you realize that there's a lot of stigma attached to being different, right? And when there's a lot of stigma, you tend to be shy and quiet about your own problems, right? And when you are trying to kind of highlight some of the concerns, you realize that more and more people share a lot of the same issues that you have. And growing up in foster care, you rely on your community so much. And so COVID showed us that a simple conversation with another person can potentially get you sick, right? When you go back to visit your family, you could potentially get them sick. And it really showed you how much people are involved with each other and how much things can touch each other, both good and bad. And so when you're making policy, you want to make sure that you're protecting and supporting the most vulnerable community and elevating all people, not doing anything for the interest of yourself. It's really not about that because your issues tend to be other people's issues as well. But are you comfortable talking about it?
Now, do you have any recommendations for others to get into public service?
Absolutely. I think the first thing that everybody should do, and I think that young people should do this as a practice, and parents should tell their kids to do this, is get involved with their local organizations. There's plenty of nonprofits that really need a lot of support, whether it's feeding people, whether it's taking care of people, whether it's mental health, community groups, and community-based organizations. For example, I'm ethnically Afghan. I used to volunteer a lot with the Afghan Coalition, and I learned my own community better. Once you start to understand how nonprofits and communities really rely on community service, government is a big part of that too. And being able to see your local school board, your local city council, seeing what decisions they make. Does it really represent what you think needs to be done? And being able to speak at a city council meeting. These are all things that people think are small, but it makes a huge impact because most people aren't doing it.
Senator Aisha Wahab, it was great to have you on California
Thank
Insider.
you. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.